election of 1800 was wild, and it almost brought the country to a constitutional crisis. And I'll tell you why. Let me set the scene. It's 1796. George Washington has decided that he will be retiring from office, so the race of 1796 is now between the great incumbent Vice President John Adams and the amazingly intelligent former Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson. Now you'd think that these two men, who were once great friends and great statesmen, could be very civil in this election. No, it was a low-down, dirty ball mud fight, and they went at it. Now eventually Adams would end up coming out on top, winning the election. There was a catch though. Thomas Jefferson was his vice president, which may confuse many of you, considering Thomas Jefferson was a Democratic Republican and John Adams was a Federalist. How did this happen? Well, in the early days of the American Republic, whenever electors met to cast their ballot, they had two votes, both for president. There was no differentiating between president and vice president on the ballot. So this ends up with situations like this, where the vice president is from the opposite party of the incumbent president, which makes no sense and was a terrible flaw, and many people knew that, but it wouldn't get fixed. So now we go to 1800, where the incumbent vice president Thomas Jefferson is running for election against the incumbent president John Adams. But this time around, they had chosen candidates who they preferred for president and candidates who they preferred for vice president. But they wanted to make sure that the candidates they preferred for each spot got picked. So one of the electors for each side was supposed to throw away their second vote. Well, comes to 1800 when they're announcing the results, it comes out to this. 65 votes for John Adams, 64 votes for his VP nominee and presidential candidate John Coatsworth Pinckney, and then Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, well, they both got 73 votes because some idiot forgot to throw away a second vote. So now, as per the guidelines of the Constitution, the election goes to the House of Representatives. But there were two issues. One, the House of Representatives was controlled by the Federalist Party, the party that was not Thomas Jefferson's, and they had to choose from two men from the Democratic Republican Party that they despised, Thomas Jefferson or Aaron Burr. Here's the second issue. Each state voted together, meaning that all the representatives from Virginia would come together, they would vote, whoever won that vote would get the vote for the state of Virginia. One vote. So all the representatives from a state like Delaware would come together and vote, and then the winner of that would get the vote from Delaware. So, the House meets and they start voting. And you think, well, it's a presidential election, we don't want to have our executive spot, not filled come March 4th, so let's get this over. Thomas Jefferson was the candidate for president, we should just go ahead and vote for him. They don't do that. The House ends up voting 35 times, and each time they deadlock, which is a problem. Now, while all this is happening, people all across the country are watching and waiting to find out the result. One of them was former Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton. Now, Hamilton did not like Burr because Burr had run against his father-in-law and taken his Senate seat, and he didn't think Burr had many principles. He didn't like Jefferson for many of his policies, but he did think that Jefferson had the sort of principles that Burr lacked. So what Hamilton ended up doing was writing to a Federalist member of the U.S. House of Representatives, James Bayard from Delaware, and he starts trying to suggest to him that he needs to vote for Jefferson or that he needs to change his vote to no selection or to abstain. Well, Bayard doesn't want to do that without getting something in return. So eventually a deal is reached between some of Jefferson's representatives and Bayard, and what happens on the 36th ballot is that James Bayard changes his vote to no selection, and the representatives from South Carolina choose not to vote at all, abstaining. and then Maryland and Vermont each switched their votes to Jefferson, giving him enough votes for him to become the president. So, Jefferson gets sworn in on March 4th, and then 4 years later, we end up passing the 12th Amendment, which forces electors to have to differentiate between who they want for president and vice president, and we never had a contested election ever again. The end.